Welcome to Through the Trauma podcast. My name is Amber Larkins, published photographer, storytelling expert, visual artist, entrepreneur, speaker, and coach. This podcast was born from one question: how do I get inspiring stories of triumph out to the people who need to hear them the most? Come with me, enter my world, where lives are getting changed, heroes are getting developed, and greatness is being achieved. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Through the Trauma podcast. Today, I have with me Miss Morgan McCarver, and she is an amazing artist that specializes in ceramics in North Carolina and Tennessee. And she has a pretty amazing story of her scoliosis journey. She's going to share with us today how art has really helped her. I can't wait to hear from you, Morgan. You have quite the resume. I was looking over some of the things that you've done and are doing, and you're quite the artist. So I'm very excited to talk with you today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the compliments. Yeah, I like to keep myself busy, so that's given me some great opportunities.
Well, I mean, staying busy is a good thing, or it can be a good thing. It keeps our mind going. And I think sometimes we, as humans, I believe that we are made as creators, and I think that's what really fulfills us. So I love talking to other creatives and artists and different types of art, and to really learn how this has transformed your life, because I know a lot of times people, they kind of brush art off as it's just fun, it's like a hobby, but it really has its place in trauma. And I've had this conversation with other guests, but why don't you just start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your story?
Of course. Well, like you said, I am a creative person. I've always looked for that creative outlet in my life. For, as long as I can remember, I've been doing something creative, whether that's playing with homemade Play-Doh with my grandmother or dancing. I love to dance. I even danced competitively for a while growing up, and that was my main passion. And then when I was in 8th grade, I had to have scoliosis spinal fusion surgery. And so basically that means that when I hit that last kind of growth spurt, instead of my spine growing straight like everybody else's, it was growing from side to side. And that is a genetic disorder that is typical to kind of run in families. And so my family knew what to look for, thankfully, and so they were able to catch it early enough. But unfortunately, for me at the time, I still had to have that surgery. And so basically, it felt like I was cursed. It felt like my whole life was crashing down because I couldn't dance anymore. I had a year-long recovery process that meant I wasn't supposed to bend or twist or do anything that could disrupt the 2 titanium rods and 18 screws that were holding my entire spine straight. And so I wasn't supposed to do anything that an 8th grader, a 14-year-old girl, loved to do, running, jumping, dancing, bending, twisting, carrying heavy things. And so for that year, I just didn't understand what was going on, why this happened to me, what my purpose was in that. But ultimately, that's when I discovered ceramics, because I was looking for that creative outlet. And my mom signed me up for just a kids' pottery camp over the summer. And I fell in love with it. Just that relationship of the clay with the potter, the flexibility of the clay that I couldn't get out of my body anymore through dance, and just having that ability to make really whatever I could imagine, so to speak. I just kept taking more and more classes, and ultimately that's what jump-started the rest of my life. That's what led to me going to Anderson to get a degree in ceramics, and it started my small business upon graduation. It's what brought me to Asheville, North Carolina, where I live now, which is a huge art community, and I've gotten to experience so many amazing different things that I never would have gotten to experience if I hadn't found my love for pottery. And so what seemed like the worst experience of my life, losing my dance passions, my dance friends, that kind of culture, turned out to be the rest of my life, the best part of my life. All of these opportunities, from writing a book to being an artist, getting a grant, getting to go to a national convention, to having solo exhibitions, all of these amazing things wouldn't have happened if I hadn't found that passion. And that passion came out of that trauma.
So you just said a whole lot of things that I want to touch on. First thing,
Yeah.
I love Asheville. I have visited Asheville several times, and I actually a couple years ago had thought about moving there just because it has such a huge art vibe there. And I'm not a ceramics artist by any means, but I love creative stuff. I love creating. So it's a beautiful place, and I love Asheville a lot. But with that being said, I what I really want to focus on is you said something that is so powerful because you talked about how this one disadvantage put you like it's really shifted your life in this direction of art and has made something that seemed like it was bad, you shifted it for good, and now you are like walking and living and doing this thing with art that is purposeful and meaningful, and it's creating all of this like amazing stuff in your life. So I've heard athletes talk about this before, about how they could get injured in a game and then they end up going into coaching, or I've heard you hear stories of this. I've not heard it in art so much so, but I would love for you to kind of expound on that, especially because I know that a lot of my listeners are, you know, more my age, like 30s, 40s, 50s, but I I really want to focus in because this happened at a young age for you. You were 14 years old. This happened at a very young age, and it takes a lot. Like you're already in the prime of discovering who you are and trying to figure out, like, teenage years are not easy. And I just want you to talk a little bit about that experience from being a teenager and then moving into this. Like, how did you? It's a very mature thought to say, I'm going to shift this for good. Um, Talk to us a little bit about that experience or that journey of figuring that out.
Yeah, so first, I will say that I didn't immediately think that I'll shift this for good. It took me 10 years after my surgery to really fully understand my purpose. But in the moment, I just needed that creativity. I was, desperate for that creative outlet. But I knew that I was going to have surgery, like I mentioned. I actually was diagnosed with scoliosis when I was in fifth grade. So I had been wearing a back brace for 3 years, but that ultimately culminated into the back brace wasn't doing what it was supposed to. And so for a while, it was in the back of my mind that maybe I'd have to have surgery. But if I just did this one thing, if I just wore my back brace, then hopefully I wouldn't. And so I was kind of putting all of my hope into that back brace. And then when I learned that I was going to have the surgery, I was honestly praying for a miraculous recovery. I was praying that, I would be healed so that I wouldn't have to have this surgery. And I didn't really understand at the time. I'm a Christian, but I didn't really recognize the Holy Spirit's voice. Again, I was, 14 at the time. And so I didn't understand that actually the Holy Spirit was telling me, your story won't be nearly as complete. It won't be as good, as rich if you don't have this surgery. And I was like, where'd that thought come from? That's crazy. I don't know what that means. That's ridiculous. And again, it took me over a decade to understand my purpose. But in that moment and during that decade, during that surgery, during that year-long recovery process, it was hard. It was hard to understand what was going on. As a teenage girl, body image is a real thing anyway. And then you throw scoliosis on top of that. I mean, even before the surgery, I would have to have, doctors looking at my torso, seeing the curvature, and telling me that my body wasn't perfect. And that's hard to hear. And then moving forward into the surgery, there were so many after effects. I wasn't in pain before the surgery, and everyone's scoliosis story is different. But I honestly wasn't in pain before the surgery. But after the surgery, my spine had been so twisted that when they stretched it out, I actually grew over an inch. And so, different muscles had shifted. One leg kind of lengthened out because my hips were uneven. My shoulders had been uneven. And so there were a lot of physical changes. I had to basically relearn everything. All of the muscles in my back had been rearranged. So I had to learn how to sit up again, learn how to walk again, all of these basic things that, as a high schooler, middle schooler, you know how to do those things. In eighth grade, I was pretty much starting from scratch. And so, yeah, that was hard physically, but also mentally, I don't think I was prepared for what that really meant, because I would go back into the classroom and I wasn't allowed to carry the heavy textbook. And so I had to carry a pillow around to sit at a desk. And there were all of these accommodations that were made for me. And I really do appreciate that, because they did have to be made. And my classmates and my teachers were great about, taking the time to do that for me. But still, just all of that attention, all of that unwanted attention was mentally draining and exhausting. And I didn't fully understand that it was making me more and more introverted during that time.
Yeah, so you were lucky because as some of these things happen to some kids, they can not have such a good experience with school and with people being bullies or maybe people not being as accepting of it. But you were lucky in that regard. But nonetheless, it's still difficult for any teenager to have to go through this. And I think back, I can relate from both angles. I can think back of when I was a teenager long ago. And I think of like what that must have been like to go through something like that. But then also, I think through it as a parent. Like, I have my kids are 9 and 12. So I think through like what that would be like from their perspective, having gone through that. So it's definitely a journey. Um, what was the surgery like? Was it how long was the healing process for this surgery?
Well, it was a year-long recovery specifically, but I was in the hospital for about a week. Um, I don't know how long the surgery was exactly. I know it was at least several hours. But basically, they were, straightening out and fixing my spine. And so they had to put two rods in my back and 18 screws to kind of force it into place. And then from there, I do have like bone holding that into place as well. But the recovery started just, the basics, learning how to sit up again, learning how to roll over in bed, because all of my muscles, all of those core muscles in your back had been sliced through. And so I had a lot of pain, honestly. So it was just learning those basics, how to hold myself upright. And again, I wasn't used to the rods in my back. So trying to figure out how do I hold myself? And the doctor explained it as I had a new center in a way. Basically, my body had tried to auto correct or redirect by curving one way and then another way and then another way. I had three different curves. And then when I got straightened out, that kind of balance, that center that I had grown accustomed to had shifted. And so there was a lot of just feeling very frustrated and feeling like a toddler, basically starting all over and knowing that I knew how to do all of this stuff. I had been, this great athlete who had just gone to a regional competition and felt so powerful and so strong. And then to be brought this low, of having someone else help feed me and someone else help take me to the bathroom and all of these basic life necessities. Yeah, it was really frustrating.
Did you go through depression during that time?
Um, it's interesting. That was still, that was before the Me Too movement. That was, 2011. That was before a lot of this mental health and seeking counseling kind of started. And so if I wasn't diagnosed, and it wasn't addressed. And so I think that's why it took me that decade to really come out of it. Because I don't know if it necessarily would have been depression, but there were definitely some things like I couldn't watch movies with hospital scenes in them. And there were some things that I didn't want to talk about my surgery. I didn't want people to know. I wanted people to stop talking about it. And yeah, there were things I needed to process that mentally I didn't know I needed to process them. The doctors didn't prescribe any kind of mental health therapy or anything. And so I thought, I just got to just not talk about it and it won't be a problem. And then, coming out of that, I realized that's actually not how that works. You really do need to address these things.
So during that time, you kind of used art as a outlet. But since that time, and we're going to come back to the art because I have questions about that as well. But during that, like, having now an awareness of these things and an awareness of mental health, and obviously, um, you're. I mean, I would not hesitate to say you're kind of a mental health advocate. You're going on
Yeah.
mental health podcasts, and so now that you understand a little bit clearer about mental health, looking back, do you think that it was depression that you went through during that time?
I think it was definitely a form of post-traumatic stress, for sure. Um, I can see in other areas of my life I've gone through depression. I would admit that. Um, During that 10 years, I think it was just a feeling of um, not, not addressing the situation, which I would categorize more as post traumatic stress, just not wanting to talk about it, not wanting to relive it, not wanting to think about it, and just trying to move on. But yeah, I think it's definitely, there's body image issues that I still deal with. There's things that I'll still deal with for the rest of my life because that surgery, is permanent. Hopefully, hopefully I won't have to have another one. But also that means that I'll always have this very rigid posture. My back will always be stiff. I'll always have limitations. And if I think about that too much or compare myself to others or think about all the things that I'll never get to do, it can be depressing. It can be, I can get kind of lost or wallow in my own sorrows, so to speak. So it is hard to realize these things and to realize the losses. But I've learned coming out of that decade, if I'm only focusing on what I can't do, that's exhausting, to only think about the things you can't do. And it's not a great place to live in. You need to move forward. And so coming out of that, I've been able to see, yes, that's true. Yes, I can't do that. Yes, you're right. In my head, I'm like, yes, I understand these thoughts are accurate, but I've got to focus on the things I can do. Look at everything I can do. I'm not strong physically, but I'm strong in other ways, so things like that really help me move forward and help me kind of stay in a better mindset, so to speak, focusing on the positives, focusing on my abilities that God has given me that I still can use, is honestly where I am right now.
Have you been through any type of therapy with like a
Um,
mental health
like
therapy?
specifically for my back, no. I have used counseling and therapy services before, though, and I think that they're great resources. And by going to therapy for other things, I've realized how much of this is rooted in that initial back surgery, essentially, all of like body image, going back to that, these feelings of unworthiness, whether that comes through in the physical appearance or whatever. Yeah, I would say that stems back to those moments, those original moments, hitting puberty and being told that your back is messed up and you need to be fixed, and all of these things that you don't want adult medical professionals speaking over you, especially over your body. Yes, so I would say, while I didn't go specifically to kind of unpack that trauma, it has been addressed, and I have realized, I have reflected on just how much in my life, how much my personality has really been affected by that experience. And essentially, whether I like it or not, today I am the person I am because of that surgery.
You know what I think is so interesting is that you gravitated to pottery. And, I'm a Christian as well. And there's a lot of references to pottery in the Bible. And then just like I've read stories of like broken pottery. I actually did a study on this because at one point I come from doing photography. That's really my creative outlet.
Cool.
I was doing these photo shoots that was called Transformation Through Trauma, which is connected to this podcast. When I started doing these photo shoots, which was photographing someone's trauma and then photographing their triumph. So it was like a two-part photo shoot that kind of photographed both. And that's where I first found a love for trauma and
Mhm.
helping people overcome trauma. But what's funny is that I did this whole study on pottery and the broken pottery and how God really puts back together. Like as humans, we are really all broken in some degree. Like life breaks us. We're in a fallen world where life is going to break us no matter what. Some people it breaks us worse. Everybody has their own journey. That's what I'm trying to say. And I feel like it's ironic that you've gone into pottery because it's a very literal sense for what has happened to you. You know, you had
Yeah.
this spine that needed to be fixed, and they had to break that to repair it. And out of that, even though it's not perfect, but none of us are, right? So even out of that, now something beautiful has grown. Your love for art, your empowerment, your inspiration that you're shedding to other people, to young girls that need this, because it doesn't take a spinal surgery for young girls to struggle with body image. I see it in my daughter.
Yeah.
I struggled with it as a teenager myself. I think the culture that we live in, it's even more of a issue now with media, with social media has been it serves its purpose, but it also is detrimental in some sense because people look at other people and they think that they're perfect and they're not. There's no human on earth that is perfect. Um, so it's very interesting, and it was not planned that you went into pottery. It was kind of like a mishap that your mom signed you up for this camp, and then you took a interest in it, right?
For sure. Yes.
Have you seen the correlation, or have you felt that correlation in your own life, the literal versus the physical sense of that?
I have. And I've tried to get away from pottery, honestly, and I truly believe that the Lord keeps drawing me back. But I didn't originally apply to go to college for ceramics. I was going to be an art instructor, an art teacher. So I applied as art education, and then there was a time I thought I'd do interior design, always kind of in the creative sense. But for a while, I thought I'd be an event planner. And the Lord, the doors that open for me, that the Lord opens for me, are always ceramics. And I think that's so interesting that He constantly pulls me back, even when I'm saying, no, I think I'll take the safe path of getting a more stable job, or a more, a major that makes more sense in the world. And the Lord always draws me back to ceramics. But honestly, recently, especially when writing the book, there have been times when I'm in the studio, and, I always say my studio practice is a business. So not every day is, an amazing trip to the holy experiences of God. Sometimes it's just the mundane working in the studio. But God does give me those moments where I'm in the studio and something happens and I just feel the Holy Spirit whispering, this is like your life. For instance, recently I was in the studio throwing on the pottery wheel, and the Holy Spirit just was speaking to me. I was stressed about changes that are happening in my life right now. And the Holy Spirit just said, just as your hands have to be on this pot for the clay to change shape, your change in your own life won't happen without my hand being on it. And even when there isn't change, your hand is constantly resting on that clay. It's supporting that clay. And in the same way, I'm supporting you. And so all of these beautiful, just little amazing moments of wisdom, I'm just, I just sit there and I'm like, thank you, God, for speaking into that moment. Thank you for giving me that experience and being able to share it with others. It is amazing how literal the similarities are, and the symbolism is that God just interweaves into pottery specifically. And like you mentioned, all the verses in the Old and New Testament, it's really beautiful to be able to see that. And now that I know the techniques behind it, be able to see it from both a Christian and a ceramic background.
Do you ever wonder if the art and the ceramics and all the things that you're doing there is it's just a tool so that God can get you to understand certain things of his wisdom, which you did say that, he sheds these little pieces of wisdom. But do you think it's a tool that he's using to speak to you, to get you to understand the way things are in the world, because he has a even bigger, huger purpose or plan for you that you can't even see yet? Do you ever meditate on that or think about that?
Yeah, for sure. I've thought recently, like I mentioned, coming out of that 10 years and really looking back at my life and saying, what is my purpose, God? Why have you given me this life, this story? And then seeing, all during that 10 years, I was pursuing my passions of pottery, going to school for ceramics, starting my business. It wasn't like it started after those 10 years. It was, faithfully following along, pursuing the passion God had given me, and constantly asking Him why, constantly seeking after Him and His path. So looking back on those 10 years and realizing God was directing my path that whole time. He didn't reveal it to me until I'd kind of come out of that place of bitterness and frustration about my surgery. I wasn't able to see it until I had moved past that. But then realizing, this might not be the end, who knows? I might do pottery for the rest of my life or I might not. This might have been a tool that now that I've accomplished everything I have with ceramics, maybe there's something else. And that can be frightening to be like, this is something I love. This is almost a crutch in a way because this is my passion. This is what I cling to. But then realizing God gave me this out of the blue. I hadn't really had a passion for ceramics before my scoliosis surgery. And so just like He gave me what I needed in that moment, moving forward, if it's not ceramics, He'll give me what I need in that moment. And then I'll move forward from there, whatever that might be, whatever that passion might be. And so I'm constantly looking for new things, constantly asking God, should I go back to school? Should I study this? Should I move here? And a lot of times it's, no, don't do that. Stay where you are. I'm not very patient either. And so a lot of times I feel like God's just laughing at me, like, just take a breath, just sit down for a second and stay where you are for a second. You just got here. But yeah, I think it's important to ask Him constantly, what is my path? Am I on the right path? Am I still on the path you want me to be on? Am I getting complacent? Should I move? Whatever that might be. But yeah, who knows? Who knows what's coming? Maybe it's something even bigger. But if not, honestly, I'm happy to do what I'm doing now. I feel like I've fulfilled the purpose that God has given me, and that's such an amazing feeling to not know for over a decade, and then to realize like God's given me that purpose, and now I'm able to fulfill that in Him. It is really empowering to feel that.
Yeah. So I ask that because with when I got into doing photography, it was one of those things that I often felt, though I love photography, I love the expression of being able to express myself and help and collaborating with people that collaboration was an expression of art. But I would often tell people in that journey, and even now still, photography was a tool because I knew when I got saved that God had something very particular. He didn't tell me what it was. I just felt the calling on my life, like there's something that He has for me. And when I look back, like I'm 44. So when I look back over my 20s, my 30s even, and the experiences that I've been through, I can honestly say that I can see how God has used every single experience for good. The Bible says he uses all for good for those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. And it's like, or all things work together for good for those who are called according to His purpose. And I look back and I see how He has orchestrated everything. And I often tell people, even now in my life, when I look at the current situations that's happening, and maybe I don't understand them, but God is amazing because He won't tell you the full plan. He says, put one foot in front of the other. This is the next step. This is the next step. This is the next step. But one thing after walking with God now for almost 20 years, one thing that I can say is that He never leads me astray. Sometimes He leads me into troubled waters, but there's something there for me to learn. And I wouldn't learn
Yeah.
that lesson if I had not gone through that troubled waters. So I'm grateful even in those things. And I always love talking to people that have that kind of same mindset. There's a difference. I've heard people explain there's a difference between joy and happiness. Like God doesn't necessarily want us to be happy. He wants us to experience joy in this life. And I find joy even in the hardest of times because I know that I'm fulfilling that purpose. And
Mm.
I think that from talking to you, I think you're kind of the same. Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, for most of my Christian life, I was saved when I was 7 or 8. So most of my Christian life, I felt like I was just not necessarily going through the motions, but just remaining faithful and not knowing why. Just not actively pursuing God, but just staying steady, staying faithful and obedient, and just asking, what am I supposed to be doing? But when I came out of that, when I moved to Asheville, and really actively began seeking after God, I realized, I was praying for these things that were being fulfilled. And it wasn't like, Lord, give me this amazing whatever, and then he does it. It was more prayers of, Lord, show me how you're going to use me. And then he would show me, and I didn't know how he was going to use me. I wasn't praying for specific ways to be used. I was just praying to be useful. And he honored that. And it's amazing to see, because I serve with the middle school girls in my church. And so it's amazing to see, like, I prayed to be useful. And I also was very lonely during that time because I moved up here completely alone. And God not only made me useful, but he gave me a community. And so now I'm able to, bond with the other youth leaders and build that community. And so he gave me what I was asking for, but he also honored my request and gave me even more than I asked for. And so it's things like that that really, like you said, it fulfills your purpose. And so even when I don't want to do something, but I know God has put me there for a reason, it's so much more easy to go into that moment. I don't go into that with dread now. I go into that with, the Lord put me here. I don't know why, but this is where he wants me. And so why would I want to be anywhere else? Because if this is where he wants me, then this is his will for my life. And some days are easier to say that than others. And some days are more fun than others. Like you said, some days are fun, some days are not, but finding joy through God using you and that purpose, that's the amazing part of it.
Mhm. And that's faith, and that's
Yeah.
walking on faith and knowing that you're whatever it is that he has for you is better than what you could ever have for yourself. And I think that the
Mm.
longer you walk with God, the more you see that. But I also want to address this that you said this, and I think I found this to be true in my life as well. I recently posted something that was talking about the how to know when God has called you to be a leader. And one of the things that I had mentioned is that I believe that when God calls you to be a leader, he will take you through these moments of solitude, these moments of being alone. When you look back over the Bible and the scripture, you see that this is exactly what he did to all of the people that he called to big purposes. Look at the children of Israel. They were in the desert for how long? 40 years, you know, um, alone. Now, yeah, they were a community, but they were a unit as well. God speaks of them in the Bible as being a unit. So they were alone. You see how even Jesus went alone into the desert. John the Baptist went alone into the desert. Like there's a loneliness is not a bad thing. I think sometimes, like in a culture driven world, we think it's a bad thing, but it's not. It's a good thing because it gives us a moment to self reflect, and it gives us a moment to spend time with God. And I truly believe that God, when we're created, He puts everything that we need inside of us. Like all of those things are already innately in us, but it's up to us to uncover them, to discover them, and uncover them in our lives. So I want to point that out because you said it. I've experienced in my life, and then I also just want to let anyone who's listening know if you are going through a moment of like solitude or loneliness, or it feels like God has put you to the side, like that's probably purposeful. And there's there's a difference in how we respond to those things too, which is, do I respond to this as being like, I feel so lonely? You can get into that victim mentality, or you can look at it for what it is. Like, this is a time of loneliness, and I'm thankful for it because through this, I'm growing, I'm learning myself, I'm spending time by myself, with myself. Um, so I think it's beautiful because every person that I've interviewed that has talked about that loneliness, I can see it in them. they have leadership abilities. They are leaders, and I think that God hasn't. I know He's not done with you. I'm not like some prophet or anything, but I'm just saying, like, I know that there's so many things left that God has for you, and just talking to you, your heart is so beautiful. Um, and so inspirational that you've gone through such a traumatic event such as this, especially as a young girl, and now you've come out and you're a walking, talking inspiration for so many others. So what you're doing is amazing. Um, Tell us a little bit about what you're up to now, what you're doing
Yeah,
currently.
of course. And thank you for saying all of that. That means a lot to hear. And I think it's important to encourage Christians in that way.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you saying all of that. But right now, I'm getting ready for a couple of things. I've got a solo exhibition coming up. Um, Actually, I've got two. I've got one this year and one the following year. And then I'll also be back in Blowing Rock. That's one of my favorite weeks of the year. It's in the summer. Artists are invited up to an old cottage that basically gets transformed into an art gallery for a week out of the summer, and the artists rotate through. So this is my third year I'll be asked back. So I'm working on that, getting ready to restock the cottage with all good pottery and stuff. So I always look forward to that. And then who knows? Who knows what else is next? I'm always applying for other opportunities, seeing what comes up. Of course, restocking the galleries I'm in and promoting the book I wrote. So you never know.
Yeah. Are you currently you're in Asheville now? I know you said you had just moved. Are you,
I am.
yeah.
Yeah.
Are you from
It's
Tennessee?
No, I'm actually from South Carolina. I'm from upstate South Carolina, but then I moved to Asheville, North Carolina during the pandemic, kind of 2021. And so I say I'm a Carolina girl because I've only lived in the Carolinas.
But I read somewhere does your art is
Oh yeah,
sold
I
in
have
Tennessee?
it is, yes, part of the Great Smoky Mountain Heritage Center. I have some pieces in there. So yeah, they reached out to me. That's another great experience of an opportunity where they just saw my work on social media and reached out wanting to sell it. So it's been great. I've done a couple of festivals down there as well, and it's a lot of fun to be able to travel for a day. See other parts, other mountains that I don't see every day. Sell my pots and then come back home.
Yeah. I had an interest in that because, I'm from Tennessee. So
Mm.
I'm kind of close to Nashville, a little bit outside of Nashville, but yeah, it's always interesting meeting other people that have connections to Tennessee. So that's why I
Oh
asked.
yeah.
Um, but you got a lot going on. So I'm excited to see where this all leads you. But I want you to take a moment and kind of just share like your big takeaways with my audience. Like, what is it that you would really like to leave them with?
Of course. Well, my biggest takeaway, I would say, is that I believe we're all creative. And there's so many people who come up to me at shows and festivals and say, oh, I could never do that. I could never do what you're doing. And whether that's true or not, that doesn't mean you're not creative. And I think, like we talked about earlier, this culture of Instagram, whatever, all of this social media has stolen the beauty of creativity because we think if we're not as good as the people we see on social media, then we're not creative. And I would just fight back and say, no, I think we're all creative because I believe we're created in God's image and He is the ultimate creator. And in the very beginning of the Bible, the very first verse, the very first verb ever used in the Bible is creativity. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And so we're introduced to our God as this amazing imaginative creator God who made everything out of nothing. And then He made us in His image. So not only is He a creator, but He gave us that imaginative power as well. And so whatever it might be, like I said before, I didn't grow up in a pottery family. That wasn't something I was used to. That was just something that I discovered through my trauma. So there might be something that you've never tried before, or something that you used to do as a kid and kind of put it off to the side. But if it brings you joy, then that is from the Lord. The Lord has given you that passion for creativity. And I would say that it's honoring Him to pursue that, especially pursuing it in a godly way. So I would just encourage everyone listening that, yes, you are creative. It doesn't mean you're the best. I'm not the best potter in the world. I know that. But it doesn't disqualify me from being a potter, and it doesn't take away my love and my passion for creativity. So I would just encourage you in that way. Go find your creative passions and pursue them and see where that leads you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I often say that, we have to be creators because, like you said, God created something huge out of nothing, like out of his word. He spoke it and it happened. And it was like, we're created in God's image. So then, therefore, we must also be creators. And I think this is why words have power. And when we speak things, I think that's why prayer has power. Because when we speak these things, we're speaking these things over whoever we're praying for or over ourselves, even. So it's very, very powerful stuff that you start to deal with. But I agree with you 100%. The leaning into that creativity is huge. And if you find fulfillment in that, that's huge. And I just want to encourage people. I think that when we can lean into our creativity, the thing is this, we feel like we live in a world where everybody wants to be like other people. And finding that uniqueness, like whatever that creative thing is that is put on your heart, follow that. And if it seems outlandish, and if it seems like even art that may seem outlandish, you could do a painting of splatters, and it seems like crazy. No one would even like this. But there is beauty found in that. And your uniqueness and your ability to express your uniqueness through creating something is really what makes the world a beautiful place. We're all different. God didn't create me to be like you. He didn't create you to be like me, and so on and so forth for everybody. So this is something I've had to learn as I got older, that it's not always good to be like everybody else. I want to be like me, the person I'm created to be. It's a hard lesson to learn. I think.
Yeah.
It's taken me 40 some odd years to learn that. But Morgan, you have such a good head on your shoulders, and you're such an inspiration. And do you do speaking engagements at all?
I've done a couple, especially with my home church, but I'd love to do more. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you'll have a lot more of that in your future as well, because you have a very inspiring message, and I really can't thank you enough for sharing that, just being open and sharing that with me and my audience today.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for this great conversation. It's been amazing talking to you.
Same here. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to Through the Trauma podcast. If you have found value in this episode or believe in the mission behind what we are doing, please subscribe so that you never miss any future episodes. Also, be sure to check out our transformation project at transformationthroughtraumaproject.com, where we help inspirational stories get heard on a larger scale through multiple platforms. If you know someone who can benefit from this episode, please share it with them. Until next time.